In this video, I'm going to talk about how a new persuasion technique might help us counteract food marketing and help us all avoid eating too much junk food and avoid dying of obesity-related illnesses. Hi everybody, this is Bruce Lambert from HowCommunicationWorks.com. This is a channel where I teach you about communication skills so you can improve your relationships, succeed at work, be more confident, and lead a more fulfilling life. In today's video, I want to talk about a new research paper that just came out in the journal Nature Human Behavior that talks about a persuasion technique that was successfully used to persuade teenagers to eat less junk food in their high school cafeteria. Now, this is not an easy thing to do, so the result was particularly impressive. One of the central challenges in health communication is to get people to behave in a way that's healthier, to make healthier choices. And the problem most of the time is not knowledge. The best example of this is cigarettes. Basically, everyone knows that cigarettes are bad for you. Knowledge of the health risks associated with cigarettes is pretty much universal at this point, and yet still around 20% of adults in the United States smoke. So it isn't a lack of knowledge that stops people from changing their behavior. It's something else. Surely it's the addictive qualities, but it's other things as well. One of the greatest health threats on the horizon is obesity. In fact, it may soon be a larger threat to public health than smoking. And yet a similar situation applies. The vast majority of us know, generally speaking, which foods are healthy and which foods are not. Nutrition science is a little bit complicated, so we're never quite sure like whether eggs are good for us or not, whether carbs are good for us or not. But we all know that a diet that consists mostly of like Coca-Cola or Pepsi and Snickers bars and potato chips and cheeseburgers is probably not going to be good for us in the long run. So there is a distinct set of foods that we call junk foods that are pretty much obvious to everyone, and pretty much everybody knows that they're not good for you. But just as in the case of cigarettes, knowing that junk food isn't good for you doesn't stop people from eating junk food. If it did, we could all live happily ever after, because the knowledge that junk food is bad for you is also pretty much universal, and yet it doesn't stop us from eating junk food. The main approach to changing people's dietary behavior in the United States is often focused on children, because the idea is if we can intervene with children who are still developing their dietary preferences and their tastes, then if we can get them to make healthier food choices as kids, those will persist their entire lifetimes and they'll live longer, healthier lives. Not only that, but kids are a kind of captive audience, and we can do interventions on them while they're in school and get the message out to basically every kid in America. Well, the past history of attempts to change kids' dietary preferences is basically a total failure, or at least a failure in large part. So we've, for years, health communication experts have gone into schools and basically tried to teach kids, nutrition charts and food pyramids and all that stuff you saw when you were a kid that, talked about vegetables and grains and fats and carbs and protein and stuff like that, put stuff in a pyramid, eat more of this, eat less of this, and it had basically zero effect on the way kids ate. Kids would sit in health class and be told that sugary beverages were bad and sweets and salty, crunchy snacks were bad. And then class would end. They'd go to the cafeteria for lunch and they'd order a Coke and a big bag of chips and a Snickers bar. So the education had basically no impact. Now note, this kind of traditional education was what I would call knowledge-based education. It was based on the idea that if we just improved people's knowledge of nutritional choices, which are healthy nutritional choices, which are unhealthy nutritional choices, they would then use that information rationally and make healthier choices. Well, that just isn't the way people work. And so those knowledge-based messages and knowledge-based interventions didn't work at all. So along comes a paper by Christopher Bryan and his colleagues from the University of Chicago, who did what they call a values-based intervention. I particularly like this intervention because it's close to one of the issues that I care so much about, which is this idea of identity. So one idea that I've talked about before, and I'll link to that previous video, is that in the context of chronic illness, for example, what bothers people so much is not necessarily the symptoms of their illness, but the loss of self that they experience when they get chronically ill. And I say, in the context of chronic illness, the primary motivating factor is a desire to maintain a certain valued identity. And this motivation to maintain and uphold a certain identity is extremely powerful as a driver of behavior. In fact, people will make choices that are consistent with their identity before they will make choices that are consistent with good health. One example I often use in class is imagine an older Italian-American woman who gets diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, and the doctor tells this older Italian-American woman, you have to stop eating pasta, and you have to stop eating bread, you have to stop drinking wine because of your type 2 diabetes. Well, this woman feels more motivated to maintain her identity as an Italian-American woman, which means serving pasta, serving bread, serving wine, than she is motivated to maintain her own health. And experience shows that people in those sorts of circumstances choose their identity over their own objective physical health. So along come Christopher Bryan and his colleagues, and they want to do a values-based intervention in these high school students, which is another way of describing what I would call an identity-based intervention in these high school students. That is, try to persuade them that eating junk food is inconsistent with valued aspects of their identity. And in particular, the two aspects of adolescent identity that these authors focused on were the desire to be autonomous, that is, free from influence, especially from adults, and the desire to promote social justice. So it's well known that among adolescents, these are two very strongly held values, and they are values that define an adolescent's identity to a great extent. So if you can show them that eating junk food is inconsistent with their desire to be autonomous from adults and inconsistent with their desire to promote social justice, you might be able to change their behavior, because people are more motivated to be who they are, that is, to express their identity, than they are motivated by rational analysis of facts of carbs and protein and which foods are in the pyramid and which aren't. So to test this theory that values-based messages and values-based persuasion or identity-based persuasion would be more effective than traditional rational persuasion or knowledge-based persuasion, they went to a high school in Texas and they randomly assigned people to either the intervention condition or the control condition. And the people in the values-based intervention condition, they got what they call the expose message, where it basically talked about how food marketing companies used science and manipulation to engineer food to addict people and to manipulate and control them. So this goes against the value of autonomy. These big corporations using food science to design foods with the perfect amount of salt, sugar, and fat to addict us to those foods, thereby taking away our autonomy. And also they pointed out that the health effects of junk food are most apparent in poorer people. And so this goes to the social justice value in adolescence. Not only are food marketing companies manipulative, but this manipulation has the most dramatic negative effects on poor people. So it's not only manipulative, but it's unjust. So in this way, the expose condition targeted values of autonomy and social justice in the teenagers. And in the control condition, people got the generic kind of nutritional message that we've all seen, which is, sugar and fat is bad and salt is bad, and just eat kale and eat vegetables and eat grains and whole fruits and stuff like that. The very traditional knowledge-based nutritional messages. And they tested the effectiveness in a couple of different ways. They tested sort of attitudes towards these food, and they tested emotional reactions towards the food. But most importantly, these kids could go to the cafeteria and use their student ID as like a credit card in the cafeteria. So they could actually check what foods these kids bought in the cafeteria for the 3 months of the school year that were left after they were exposed to either the intervention message or the control message. And sure enough, the values-based, identity-based intervention worked. The kids who got the identity-based or values-based message, the expose message about manipulation and social justice, bought less junk food in the cafeteria with their IDs than the kids who got the control message. There was one interesting wrinkle in this. The message only worked for the boys in the school. It didn't work for the girls. In the girls, there was no difference between intervention and control, but among the boys, the intervention was much more successful than the control. It reduced junk food consumption more than the control. The authors aren't exactly sure why this was the case. One explanation that they offer is that adolescent girls are extremely concerned about weight and body image, and that basically any message about junk food was going to make adolescent girls eat less junk food. So even the knowledge-based message about junk food to these girls, because they were so concerned about weight and body image, suppressed their consumption of junk food for 3 months after the experiment, even in the control condition. But the boys care less about body image and weight, and so the message was effective for them, whereas the control condition didn't have any effect on them. What's the take-home lesson? Targeting people's values and their identity, focusing persuasive appeals on people's identity and showing them that a particular behavior is inconsistent with their identity is a powerful and effective persuasive technique. The idea that you can persuade people by showing them a discrepancy between their behavior and their values is not really new. It actually goes all the way back to the 50s and earlier to the idea of cognitive dissonance. The idea that if I point out to you that you say you're someone who cares about the environment, but you don't recycle, this creates in your mind a dissonance, an uncomfortable feeling of conflicting values that you want to resolve by changing your behavior. So similarly, this values-based intervention or identity-based intervention creates in the minds of these adolescent boys, it turns out, dissonance between the idea, I want to be autonomous, I want to promote social justice, and then this other idea, oh, I like junk food. And then they realize, oh, I can't keep eating junk food if I want to dramatize the aspect of my identity that values autonomy and social justice. So the way they resolve this uncomfortable dissonance is by reducing the amount of junk food they eat. And in that way they can dramatize, I am an autonomous, independent young person, and I act in a way that promotes social justice. So there you have it, some rare good news on the public health front, a kind of intervention that might actually reduce the consumption of junk food among adolescents and thereby slow or even reverse the obesity epidemic. If you've gotten something useful out of this video, I'd be so grateful if you went down and gave it a like. If you haven't seen our channel before and you like this kind of content, please subscribe and go on over to howcommunicationworks.com, which is our website where I maintain a mailing list. If you sign up for the mailing list, we'll email you an ebook about empathy and then maybe send you an email once or twice a week when we release a new YouTube video. If you click the notification icon, YouTube will notify you every time we post a new video so you won't miss anything. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time.